Hello, so it's time to reconstruct the melodica. As you can see, I've actually now cleaned off these two pieces, actually three pieces. Where's the third piece gone? I've knocked it on the floor. So yeah, I've cleaned up the bad repair that was on here. This is where the bad repair was stuck before, and I've kind of gone along it with a valeting knife to scrape away anything before sanding. What I did, I used a complete sheet of sandpaper on a totally flat surface. I checked my surface was flat using a steel ruler, and I've just kind of rubbed back and forth this way. Again, not too much because we don't want to be changing the size of the chambers, especially not these very small ones for the high notes. You know, I wanted to get all the old glue off if I could, but I didn't want to be sanding too much. Also, remember to sand this piece as well. I've sanded this on both sides. If you don't, and you go to glue it back together, and you've sanded the other two pieces, what may well happen is you end up with a gap here. Now, what I actually did after sanding this piece as well, I put a clamp across these two pieces and just made sure that I could insert that so as that it wasn't pushing the two pieces apart at all. I did also clean the dowels up because they had glue on them. Again, I've been very gentle with everything, but I cleaned the dowels up again just because I didn't want any glue on there to stop anything being pushed together. The other thing I have done, some of the glue from when it was first glued together had obviously, when it was clamped, seeped into these chambers. I've kind of gone round just with a round file, clearing out as much of the old glue as I could, kind of doing this type of action very gently. Again, I don't want to be too heavy handed. I don't want to be making those chambers any bigger than they were originally, but I'm obviously going to get a bit of glue squeeze in again when I clamp my two pieces together. So I wanted to get the spill away from what was there originally as well. Obviously I don't want to be blocking any holes or anything. So the other thing I am going to do, I don't want to be using a brush to brush glue onto these pieces. If I do that, I'm going to spill into these chambers. So what I'm going to do instead, I've sanded this piece of wood as well. I've also got two blocks ready for clamping them together, because obviously I don't want to damage the pieces at all with the clamps. So I've made two pieces, 29 centimeters long, because that's the length of the melodica. And for the gluing, what I'm going to do is apply the glue on here, and then I shall push down my pieces onto there to apply glue onto them without getting too much on and without hopefully spilling into the chambers. Now I'm going to use this Evo Stick wood glue. I'm using exterior glue because it's moisture resistant, waterproof in fact, they claim on the back. We're going to be blowing into the melodica. We're creating moisture when we're blowing in, so it makes total sense to me to use a waterproof glue. Now I will just explain actually as well, these pieces I'm going to use to clamp the melodica pieces together. You want to make sure you've got flat pieces because you don't want to be creating any bends when you glue these two pieces together. If you want to check your pieces flat, just go across the two corners with a steel ruler, across the other two. Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. If you put any bends or warps in this, you're going to have a problem because the brass plate, the actual reed plate, is completely flat. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to glue this up. You want a fairly decent coat. You want to get as much of the two sides of the melodica covered as possible. Put that piece of melodica down. Skidding across it nicely. I can see the chambers, so I can see I'm not pushing glue into them. Take that piece off. Didn't work quite as well as I had hoped. What I'm going to do is press down. I mean, I do think there's a slight warp in these melodica pieces as well, because I've noticed that when I've sanded them, which is again why you want perfectly flat pieces of wood. Could have gone better. What I'm going to do is go across like that, where I can see there isn't much glue. What I do is just push that edge down like that on there. I'm certainly beginning to get happier. What I'm doing is making sure that there's glue all the way round where any of the chamber holes are, which essentially there is now. That's not bad. Obviously I'm going to glue up the other side as well. So what I'll do first, try and get as much pressure all over as I can. Learn from last time. I'm going down the middle, and particularly down both sides. So this is the top piece where the keys go. Yeah, a lot more successful with that piece. I mean, I think it's the warp that caused half the problem in the first place. I did notice that it was warped, as I say, when I was sanding. Didn't want to do too much about that because essentially when I clamp it, it should take the warp out of it. Yeah, so we've got a pretty good covering all over there. Gone into those holes ever so slightly. Get a piece of paper. I mean, I don't think it'll make a huge difference because Hohner certainly didn't seem to care if some of the glue spilled in. There was a fair bit in there when I cleaned it out, but yeah, I'm just removing the bits. I wanted to avoid filling with my paintbrush. I still think this is a better way of doing it because there's less glue on there. They do say, you know, you should give it a couple of minutes before you push the pieces together anyway. So this is what we're doing. I'm going to pop a little bit of glue on the dowel in a second. Obviously there's two different lengths of the dowel. It's fatter the end you blow into, that's where the longer piece of dowel goes. Doesn't need loads of glue on it, but I don't want the dowel slipping out once we've got the melodica back together. I'm not pushing that down as far as it will go because they'll push together when I clamp. So yeah, a little bit of glue on that one as well. There's some glue gone in the dowel hole there. Right, where's my other piece? Here's my other piece. Just get some glue on that. I'm also checking which way round it went. I'm having a quick look now. You can tell because one side has got 3 holes in it, the other side's got 2 holes in it. It's just the way the melodicas are put together, and that will be the same on all of them because of the way they're put together. I'll actually get a bit of glue on that edge as well. Yeah, I might as well use the glue that's on the scrap piece of wood. That will wash off if you want to use your piece of wood again. Right, so that's my 3-hole side, and that's my 2-hole side. So that piece goes on there. Get the other pieces, line up the dowels. The dowel holes go all the way through, so I can actually see where I'm pushing it together. The dowels mean you can't fail but get it lined up perfectly. You cannot get that wrong. So now what I'm going to do is get this clamped together as quick as I possibly can. So I've written outside on my clamp pieces of wood as well because I sanded the insides to make sure there was no bumps or anything in them. I'm going to use a quick clamp first in the middle. Squeeze it together as much as I can. I want to get 2 clamps at each either end as well because I want to make sure that those edges go together beautifully. What I'm going to do is not squeeze that one as tight as I possibly can just yet until I've got another one like it on the other side. Now I can obviously make sure I clamp both sides evenly. So that needs to stay on now. I'm going to leave that for 24 hours. as you can see, we're ready for the reed plate to go on. One thing you'll notice, don't know whether you can see, but I have just put a little bit of matchstick in these screw holes for the reed plate, because when I took the screws out, oh, there's the other one. I've sliced up a matchstick into several pieces, and that's not a whole thickness, that's about a quarter thickness of a matchstick in there. I did notice when I took the plate off that the screws didn't seem to be very tight at all. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure this all lines up beautifully, because the holes for where the bottom screws on kind of pull the whole thing together as well anyway, because where these mount squeezes the whole thing together. And make sure that that reed plate is perfectly flat against the wooden part of the melodica. I have sanded that a few times. I've mentioned before in my previous video, you don't want to do too much sanding because you don't want to be changing the size of the actual chambers. So we just have 2 more fixings left to do. Is that 2? 3. Oh, I've got 3 left, yes. I've got a little container that I did put all of my bits in when I took the reed plate off. I mean, what I am doing, I'm wanting to use the original holes that these fixings were in. I mean, these are essentially about approximately an 8mm brass tack. I mean, essentially we've got 4 screws and there must be at least 20 of these brass tacks as well. I'm wanting to use the original holes because some of these tacks go into chambers. I don't want them to go a different route. What I am also doing, don't know whether you can see, but I'm giving them a little dab of olive oil. A, that's going to help them find their way. B, what it should also do, it should mean there's less chance of any breakout as I bash it in. And if there's any gaps left at the end, that oil might hopefully seal up any gaps around the nails. Okay, as you can see, I was pushing that down, just giving it a little wiggle and pushing it down. Yeah, see, I've pushed that most of the way. I just want to be confident that I've taken the original route. And because I don't want to be hitting my hammer, the head is about the width of the 2 of those reeds. I do not want to be hitting a reed with a hammer because they would be very easy to break. So all I'm doing, I mean, a lot of people would have a punch down tool. I've got a nail that I've used for a long time. I don't know whether you can see, but the end is actually quite flat. I've used it a lot for this type of job. And I'm tapping down on the end of that so as that I'm not putting the head of the hammer anywhere near the reed plate. Because yes, last thing I want to do is damage a reed. Same procedure, just a little touch of olive oil. Olive oil because obviously we can eat olive oil. This is something you're going to be breathing into and possibly sucking out of. I certainly don't want to be putting any. Yeah, I certainly don't want to be putting any toxic oils in there. So yeah, I'm just popping that in, giving it a bit of a wiggle. As you can see, I've pushed that in most of the way. So I'm in the original hole. I've noted that that one went in at a slight angle at the Hohner factory. So I'm following the angle, look. When I hit it down. Now I do remember as well, when I took this apart, that there was one tack that was like it had never been put in properly at the Hohner factory. It had only been tapped in a couple of knocks. I'm wondering whether this is the last one I'm just about to do. It was down this end somewhere, I do remember. Whether I'm going to have to actually hit one in quite hard and there won't be an original path, I'm not sure. I don't know whether that was a superstitious thing at the Hohner factory, or possibly just for the one person who assembled this one originally. These seem to... Oh, I can push that one in. So I think actually one of them, I mean, I do think this melodica had been taken apart before. I don't know how much they'd taken it apart because it seemed to me the repair wasn't very good. They just squirted some stuff in the side and didn't do a very good job of squishing it together. Don't want to hit too hard because I don't want to damage the reed plate. You can look along the edge though and see that that piece of brass is sat perfectly. I want to put the back on so as that it keeps the reeds safe. While they're out in the open, they're in danger of being damaged. I'm just having a look how nice that looks with the red and the wood. Now what I actually need to do before I put the back on, I need to put the mouthpiece back, because the two fixings here for the back, they are an integral part of the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece at the Hohner factory, there was also glue all round here, okay, because this is where we're blowing into the melodica. You can see the brass plate just about in there as well. Look, you can see the two pieces of brass where we're blowing in to the back. We're letting air out of these holes to make a sound. That's got to be glued, and I don't want to glue that without putting these fixings in, because that's going to give me the best possible joint there. It's glued here just to stop any air getting out from anywhere around these gaps. Got my glue. Do the mouthpiece first. I'm going to leave the red back on because I want to turn it around that way, and I don't want to put it down on the reeds. So what I'm going to do is just glue up round here, make sure we get a good seal. There's two screws that go in on this side. I'm actually going to put some on the back here as well, all around there. I mean, I don't even want too much, maybe just a bit on the sides, anywhere where we think a bit of air could escape. Just going to go around that with the brush, just to make sure that all around that hole is glued. When I say around the hole, I'm talking about this one. Just want to make sure we got a nice tight seal where we're blowing in. Oh, that's the mouthpiece, that's okay. So yeah, these are the screws that came out. Never tighten anything up as tight as it'll go until I've got all of my screws in place. So, and I'm going to come around the back as well. Put these two long, so it's the two screws that look like this. I don't know whether you can see that, but they actually go inside. There's actually a metal nut inside the mouthpiece that accepts these. Again, some people might think I'm a bit mad oiling things up. No, good idea. There's a nut in there. Let's put some oil in there. We want it to be able to come undone again in the future. As I say, that is going to pull that mouthpiece together and help that glue go off. So yeah, I wanted to make sure that I put the mouthpiece back on when I put the back on, ultimately to keep the reeds safe. Before I tighten up as well, what I am going to do, screws like these, they are a real screw that go into the back of the melodica. What I'm going to do is just put a few in as well, just because if I'm tightening everything up at this end, I don't want it moving to where it shouldn't be, down at this end. Okay, so I'm going to start tightening out. Get everything nice and tight. That holds the mouthpiece together. Never really want to over tighten anything that's going into wood. You want to give it quite a decent tighten, but you know, shouldn't be over tightening. That glue I've put around it should make that nice and tight. I put all the other screws in the back for now. I suppose I might as well, because I am going to want to play it once it's all reassembled. And what all these screws are doing, they're creating a seal around the back, and they're actually helping to hold the brass reed plate down onto the wood as well. They're helping clamp it all together. The next thing to do will be to put these hinges back on. These hinge the keys for the notes. These were quite badly corroded. It's a wind instrument, you're blowing moisture into it the whole time. So what I have done with these, I mean they were a bit bent as well when I managed to finally get them off. I'm going to use the same method as for the reed plate to put these back on, and put a little bit of olive oil on them as well. What I did after getting them off, yeah, they were a little bit bent. I took a wire brush to them to get any corrosion off of them. straighten them up in the vise, and I've actually given them a paint with this spray paint here. Now I use that because I actually use it on my transit van wheels. I know how good it is at keeping the corrosion back. So we've got the key hinges back on, as you can see. Some of them I've actually put tacks in there that have got a slightly thicker shaft on them, because some of these were really loose when I put them back in. So the loose ones, I've put something with a thicker shaft there just to tighten it all up a bit. I put some masking tape over the holes as well. These are the note holes. I did that just so that I could blow into it really hard and just make sure I have fixed the problem with it, which I have done. That is lovely and airtight now. Actually, I might as well take that tape off. And the last thing I'm going to do today, because I will have to wait for the glue to dry, I'm going to put the felt pads back on that stop the keys from clicking when you press down. So they just need to be glued back on. I don't want too much glue, just a thin bead, and I'm following the old line. Same for the other side. These don't come as far, this one, because it doesn't need as much. The flats and sharps. Doing this so that I get an even pressure all the way along when I press down. So I need to leave that to dry now until tomorrow, and then I've probably got the most fiddly job of all, which is putting the keys back on. Right, well, it's time to put the keys back on. I've got basically the hinge parts lined up beautifully. This long pin has to go through. Each key has a spring as well, so I've not been looking forward to this job, to be honest. We've got these kind of springs here. Now the short piece of the spring sits on the bar, the long piece goes under the actual hook on the key itself. Now I'm really going to struggle to try and get those on with the spring like this. So what I've done, I've taken the cartridge, the ink cartridge, out of a big biro, so that I've got a thin plastic tube. And what I'm going to do for each of these springs, and I've got 25 of them, I'm going to squeeze the springs together and just pop them inside the plastic tube. I mean, that's good as well, because I can actually see which is the top part of the spring and which is the bottom part of the spring, but I've just inserted it like that, because essentially that's got to go between those two pieces and between the actual hinge part on the melodica. These springs as well, again, you know, they're 60 years old, so there's a bit of corrosion on the springs. So I will just dunk each one in my olive oil that I've got here as well. Certainly not going to do any harm having a bit of olive oil on the hinge arrangement, and it should just stop the springs from corroding further in future. Now, as you can see, I've actually lined all my keys up as well in the correct order, so as that I'm ready to go. The bar that fits inside has a point at one end I mean, it was very easy to get the keys off because all I had to do was pull this bar out and they all came off. I cupped my hand over because I knew there were springs in there as I pulled it out, just to make sure that nothing pinged off and I didn't lose any of those springs. Right, and what I'm going to do, you know, a bit of olive oil on here, certainly not going to do any harm. I'm just going to start that off with a bit of olive oil as well. So essentially, this is going to be a very delicate operation. I have got my wobbly hands. That's because I'm a little bit nervous about doing it. Now, this piece of tube that I've cut should be long enough. Actually, what I'll do, I'll get it through the first hole of the key first. There we go. Just checking which is top and bottom. I have got my head torch on because it means I can see what I'm doing a bit easier. Actually, I'm wondering whether pushing the key helps to... And I've pushed the bar in slightly too far, so I can't get the hinge in. There we go, hinge is going in now. Looks like I've still got to get that bar out a touch. There, now that looks... It's definitely got the hinge. Let me just make sure I'm right when I come out on this side. I mean, after doing the first one as well, my brain is telling me that the bar will be perfectly straight as we do the next one. There we go. Right, I'm pushing it in a little bit too far. Definitely feels like we've got the hinge, or the spring I should say. Don't know whether I've been saying hinge the whole time. Right, so I'm just going to pull it out slowly. There's the first click. There's the second click. Now, one reason I did line all the keys up as well, I'm trying to make sure I put the same keys on in the same place they came off. The bottom of these pads, they do have a bit of an indent where they've been sat on the holes for 60 years. I did think about changing the pads, but that was going to cost me an awful lot of money. And ultimately, I don't think it really needs it. Now, interestingly, on the more modern Hohner melodicas, there isn't a pad at all. There's just the plastic piece. So I did decide we'll just stick with what we've got, but we'll make sure the notes go back on in the same place. Now, interestingly, so I'm just looking at my second note. I've got no black note here. So I actually skip a hole in the actual hinge arrangement, so my next key actually goes here. So that does mean, you know, by the time I've got to there, I am perfectly straight. I mean, these keys aren't really that accurate when they come down either. So those indents that are on the pads, you know, they weren't coming down precise over the years anyway. I don't think it would matter too much if you didn't put the notes back in the same place they came off, but certainly I think it's worth the effort in making sure you do. So yeah, I'm just popping my next spring in, giving it a bit of oil, not too much, just a touch, you know, that'll work its way up and down the spring, hopefully stop any corrosion in the future. So yeah, actually what I'm doing is, now it's difficult to see now that the first key is on, but I can see from this side. And yeah, so last time I actually pushed down on the key a little bit. Oh, got that in the right place. Really difficult to see what you're doing. That does feel like I've got it. And there we go, we're coming out. I'm just double checking that everything looks good. Yep. So I shall unsheath my spring again. There's the first little click. I'm just making sure I'm in the groove my biro pieces in the groove as I pull out, just to make sure the spring pops into the correct area. And there we go, we've got 2 keys on. So, you know, I'm looking at the holes as well. I've arranged my keys anyway. So we've actually got a black key next. So this is where we're not going to leave a gap because we've got a black key. So let's just get him started. Yep, and I've grabbed him. I'll get my next spring ready. I put them all in a Vegemite lid so that I don't lose them. Obviously I had them in the jar with the lid closed while I've been working on the melodica so that I could keep them safe. Put them in there again. A little bit of oil. So again, yeah, I'm just making sure I've got it the right way up before I insert it. And I keep that away a little bit. Yep, that's the right way up. It feels like I've got it. Looks good. So yeah, you can actually see better from this side on the black key when I talk about the making sure that the biro cartridge is lined up in the slot as you pull it out. So yeah, I'm just going to push through with the bar again. There we go. I can just see it, just see him popping out at the end. Actually, I will push him through a bit too much, just in case anything pings when I pull the spring or pull the sheath off the spring. I'm just making sure the biro's in that groove is what I'm talking about as I pull it off. There's the first click, and there's our second click. Got our first working black key on there.
Yes, sir. Nothing to worry about. No stone left unturned. Yeah, man. Perfect. Mash it up like this, man.
I deserve a nice cup of tea when this is finished. I can think about tuning it once I've got all the keys on. I'm going to have a break because, as I said before I even started, this has been a right fiddle. And there is a slight bend in that end, and at the moment it's pointing down towards the wood. I'm just going to see if I can twist that and get it pointing upwards. I mean, it's even getting hard to twist it now. I'm just checking to make sure that it still looks like it's in the right place. I have just missed the last key. I mean, a couple of them when I've missed them. Yeah, there we go. If it hasn't come through the hole too much, what I've been able to do is hook it on, because I can see the brass pin coming through, and I've actually been able to, there isn't a lot of room, but as long as it hasn't come through much, I am able to sort of just wiggle it on. Just trying to be careful of the bottom of my melodica there. So you can tell just by gently pulling on these whether you've actually managed to get them in properly or not. It's just a little 4-ounce hammer I've got here. Yeah, that's through nicely. There we go. We've got a keyboard back on our melodica again. Yeah, if you look at the bottom, we've just left a small bit of that pin showing. And if we look at this end, we've just got a very small piece showing here. Now that sounds like a melodica to me. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so now it's time to tune. It's actually been together for a couple of days now. I've been so busy with work, I haven't had a chance to get back to the melodica. So that should be nice and dry now, nice and safe for me to take the back off. Couple of things to think about before tuning. Normally, reed instruments get tuned a little sharp, and there's a few reasons for this. One is, the harder you blow, the flatter the note you get. So blowing harder actually makes the note go flat. The other thing that tends to happen is with a melodica, you're blowing into it, you're building up moisture inside. As the reeds get a little bit wet, they'll go flatter as well. So really, you do want to be tuning it a little bit sharp. I've actually set my tuner to 443 as opposed to 440. So that's A essentially is 443, so as that I do tune a little bit sharp. The other thing to consider, because obviously because of the breath and the fact that when you blow harder you get a flatter note, when you are tuning you want to make sure that you're using a consistent breath as you're making a note of each note. Now the other thing is, once I've got the back off, I can't check the notes, so what you need to do, I've written down every note on a piece of paper, and what I'm going to do is go through checking each note and writing down whether it needs to be made sharper or flatter, and if so, how much. I'm going to start off with the lowest F. And as you can see what happened there, the F was very flat and we got gradually sharper until we got to that C, which was actually bang on. So I'm going to actually use that C as my main reference, if you like. The B and the A could do with a slight sharpening. And really that's only a couple of cents. So I've written S for sharpen +2 against the B and the A. So I've made all of my notes of what I needed to do. Now interestingly as well, the other C was also spot on. I'll just show you. So what I did to check that both C's were spot on with each other, I've blown into the first C. To check that they were in with each other, and I've used both of those C's as reference as I've checked each note. For example, the high C sharp was also spot on. What I've done is blown into the C first. And then checked the other note. I'll go for one that's way out. Look, the B flat that's below that C. That's almost 20 cents out. I've actually written 18 here. As you can see, it actually changes a little bit as you're playing as well. And the thing there to do is, you know, play each note several times, because the reeds will warm up as you're doing it. They'll get a little bit moist. They'll go flatter. So the key here, you know, make sure you play every note many times. Now the other thing, I did note that one of these screws turned when I put the back on. Kept turning, so it's been over tightened in the past. Yes, it was that one. Putting all screws in a pot so that I don't lose any. I could probably find a screw the same in my vast collection in the shed, but you want to keep it as original as possible. I don't particularly even want to change any screws in it. Apart a lot easier than last time. So yeah, I'm actually wondering whether my comedy note is to do with the fact that I've got too much gap there. Because when I look at the other high notes very close to it, they've got very small gaps. So I'm actually wondering whether the gap is too big, and that's why I'm getting that comedy sound. I think ultimately, for having a go at fixing that strange comedy note, first thing I'm going to do is see whether I can push it down into the... Oop! Now I've pushed it down too far there. Should be able to get it back out again without too much trouble. I would have expected if I'd have pushed a reed into a chamber that it would pop back out again. Because certainly on a harmonica it would. I certainly don't want to be taking the reed plate back off because I've only just kind of put that back on. Yeah, really don't want to be breaking reeds. So, after putting the kettle on, yeah, I've made myself a pot of tea, although I haven't been to get one yet. What I've actually done, I thought, as I was putting the kettle on, I thought, well, hang on a minute. I don't need to blow to push it out. What I actually need to do is suck. Now, that's going to be really difficult to do. So, what I actually did, I got the same piece of Bic Biro that I used for the springs to put the keys back on. I've stuck it on the end of a pump. Inserted it. So what I've done, I've opened up that F key, inserted it, and kind of masked round, pumped very hard whilst trying to get this bit of paper in. And what it's done, it's lifted it enough just for me to get a big piece of paper under there. Now I've not pinged it up yet, but hopefully, now that I've got that paper under there, what I should be able to do is come underneath the paper. I should be able to do now. There we go. Got him back up again. So that method has worked. As I say, I was a bit surprised that it actually stuck in so easily, because normally a reed, they're normally cut pretty exactly to the hole, and you can normally push them in and they will pop back out again, but I'm not going to tempt fate again. Yeah, I've got him back out. So if I take this masking tape off, I put the masking tape on kind of all around the key so that I wasn't letting any air out. As I pumped, all I've done is kind of adapted the end of the pump, put the piece of the Bic Biro on, opened up the key, inserted it in, pumped hard, and yeah, that's done the trick beautifully. The very act of me pushing it in as well, that's actually closed that gap quite nicely, which is what the original intention was with me pushing down on it. Just going to see if I get a sound from that F note now. Still getting that comedy sound from it. As I said, it did look like it was too open. Okay, so I've had a bit of a think about the problem while I've been having a cup of tea. I often find it's worth stepping away from something when you're not quite sure what's wrong, so as that you can have a bit of a think about it. What I'm actually thinking, I was surprised that this F didn't pop out when I pushed it in. And I'm actually thinking, is that what the problem is? Is it because the reed can't get into the chamber? Does it have to vibrate back and forth, go into the chamber and come back out? Get a bit of paper under there. That's got to be what the issue is. To me, it sounds, the sound it's making, it is like something's being restricted. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I've just popped a bit of paper under there. I'm just going to hold that reed up. I've got a metal spudger there that I'm doing it with. I call these spudgers. They're kind of devices. I've got a plastic one here as well. I use these for opening all sorts of devices, particularly good if you've got laptops that need taking apart. sure this note is going to sound fine once I've got it. Now that looks better to me. They don't need a huge amount of filing. It's still not going in. See, it seems like the rivet doesn't seem like it's moved. Because as I said before, I did wonder whether it may have done this or this slightly, but you know, I'm wondering whether this harmonica's always been like this. Now that is entering to a certain amount at the top, so I just need to take a little bit more off. See, I'm actually learning myself here. I'm learning a little bit about reeds, possibly learning a little bit about what to look for next time. I'm hoping actually if I get this note sounding like a note again, I'll be able to squeeze the cover on and just check the tuning of that note. I may be increasing the gap here. I am wondering whether this harmonica's always been suffering from a comedy F. Still getting caught a bit further up, but that is letting it enter the chamber and come back out now. But I'm going to see whether that actually seems to have made any difference or not. Oh my word. Actually, no, that is sounding better. Still sounds wrong, but it sounds better than it did before. So what I'm trying to make sure I don't do is file too much off here where it is entering okay, and you know, try and get it here, but it's quite difficult. Don't take too much off each time. As I said, I don't want to take too much off here, because if you make too much of a air gap around the reed and the plate, you're going to have to blow really hard to get that note to sound. So gently does it. I mean, hopefully none of you really have this problem. I've not come across this on a melodica before. I was quite surprised when I heard it. I've come across many melodicas in my life. Never heard one make a sound like that. Surely that's got to go in now. We are still just catching here slightly. I might just test it again, just in case that is enough. Certainly getting better. It's actually not a note I'm likely to play that often, but that's not really the point. I mean, the reason I got a alto melodica was so that I could play the lower notes it gives you. If I was playing an F up here, more likely to have the soprano in my hand anyway. What you don't want to be doing is popping that reed off or snapping it. So everything is gently. I almost want a slightly thinner metal spudger. this instead, just so that I can get closer to the rivet. Don't want to be filing away the actual reed plate. I've got my hand in the way, so let me just twist around a bit so you can see. Yeah, I'm just trying to get it so that I can file up a bit closer to the rivet as well. So it seems to be catching on this top edge again. It's almost like I moved some of the metal from here up to here. I might have done that with a bit of bearing. I'm just trying to go all the way along it now, as flat as I possibly can to it, to take an even amount off all the way along. Gently does it. Now to the naked eye, that looks pretty good now, but that looks a lot better. And what I'm going to do is, I've opened the gap up a bit, so I'm just going to try and decrease it by pushing it in. This is what I was expecting to happen when I pushed this reed in earlier. Now I am having to blow quite hard to get that, so I'm hoping I've not taken too much material off. Actually, what I do need to do is decrease that gap more. When I talk about the gap, I'm actually talking about the gap between reed and the reed plate here. The much lower notes have got a much higher gap than the higher notes. See, I've just gently eased it back towards that way. Now, when I just put it back on, even without it screwed on, I suspect I won't have to blow quite as hard to get that F. Wow, that sounds so much better. Where's my tuner? Just double checking I'm on 443 again. As you can see, we are. So I was using my C as the reference note, so if I can give the right amount of breath with the C to make it green. So as we can see, that F is probably about 10 cents sharp. So on with the tuning. So I've got two different tools depending on whether I want sharp or flat. I'm going to use kind of like a round file if I want to make a note flatter, flat file if I want to make a note sharper. Right, so here's our first F. Shouldn't need that much work. And what I'm actually going to do, rather than filing like this, because if I do this, I'm going to create a gap between the end of the reed in the chamber. I know I've done it a bit on this F up here, but that was to get that note working again. But to make a note sharper, we want to file the end. For my F, I want to make it about 10 cents sharper. Now you'd be surprised how little you actually need to file. The E. That again was way out. And the F actually needs flattening. So all of my other white notes needed to be made sharper. The F actually needs flattening. So I'm going to switch to the round file for that one. I don't really need a spudger for this. And what I'm going to do is go for the middle of the reed. I'm going to try and not file the edges so much as the middle. And all we want to do to make a note flatter is take a little bit of material off close to the rivet end. Again, gently does it. Now, so the two long screws go all the way through the mouthpiece as well. So the two long screws go in these holes at this end. I'm going to put the cover back on now.
There's nothing to worry about.
And there we have it. Very early alto Hohner melodica. Back to perfect condition again. Sounds lovely. I'm absolutely delighted. Took a lot of work. Probably took me, I would think in total, the best part of 8 hours. Might have even been 9. I think it's well worth it though. I'm absolutely delighted. I don't mind having had to put that work in. What I've ended up with is a absolutely fantastic instrument. And certainly I'm never going to sell it. Not unless I was offered. You know, everything has a price. But yeah, it would take a lot of money for me to part with this. I'm absolutely delighted. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.